All right, we're live.
Perfect.
Coach Tyler, how's it going today? Good to see you.
Going good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Maybe just as an intro to kind of what we're trying to do here, you have some awesome experience in the collegiate sector, and I'll kind of let you give your background on where you've been, what you're doing. But you're in the collegiate sector now, and then for me, I'm in the private sector, so we're kind of attacking the same animal from two different lenses and from two different perspectives. And so I think the goal for both of us here is just continue to educate, who we interact with, continue to educate the market, and just get hopefully some good information out to the masses. But with that, I'd love to hear kind of your background, where you're at now, kind of what's led to you being here, and then I can go and do the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I played collegiate football, Maryville College, a small D3 school, from 2020 to December 2024. So I had 5 years of collegiate football experience. While I was there, got my undergrad in physical education. I saw how much the weight room impacted me, and so I really wanted to get my teaching degree so I could learn how to actually speak the language to kids, because you can get all the fancy terminology, but if you can't actually show it to people who don't know the fancy terminology, it doesn't really matter. So I saw how much the weight room impacted me as an athlete, and I knew I wanted to stay in the sports realm. So continued to get my certification and got my CSCS in 2025. Followed a bunch of different internships. I've worked in private sector, I've worked at the high school level, worked at the collegiate level, and that thankfully landed me a position at Lincoln Memorial University, D2 up in Harrogate, Tennessee, kind of middle of nowhere. But absolutely love my position here. I've worked with a lot of different teams, but primarily now work with softball, work with women's soccer, and work with both men's and women's wrestling. So obviously main goal is try and get them better prepared for their sport, and absolutely love the collegiate setting.
It's awesome. I love it. I kind of had a similar background. I also played Division III football. It was at a school called the University of St. Thomas. It's up in St. Paul, Minnesota. I wish we played each other. That would have been quite the time.
Would have been pretty awesome.
But I had a couple injuries when I was up there that forced me to end my career a little bit sooner than I would have liked. And then kind of going through return to sport programs, rehab facilities, it kind of made me realize the importance of physical preparation for the sport, especially one that's as demanding as football is. And so then kind of going through those experiences and thinking about how I prepared for my high school seasons, college seasons, I thought I really didn't do a very good job at it. And so for me, I wanted to take that knowledge and apply it to kids that have similar dreams, goals, and aspirations. For me, I was always a hard worker, knew I wanted to play college football in high school. And so in getting there and then having it not turn out the way that I wanted, my goal was to not have another kid go through the same experience. So I'm down in Maryville, Tennessee, kind of your old backyard, and running a private sports performance training facility. We work with athletes 7 all the way through the collegiate and pro sectors. And then we also train general population adults. And it's been a really fun process. So now that we have our intros kind of out there, our goal or topic of today is in-season and out-of-season training. We've kind of been going back and forth a little bit on this. And so we'll just kind of rifle through some questions. You can share your experience in working with, college athletes and going through an in-season, out-of-season program. I know we're just coming off the summer and a lot of your athletes were away from you.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. And then I can share my perspective with working with kind of more younger populations and more broader athletes, I guess. But I guess when you think about in-season and out-of-season training, what does that mean to you?
Obviously, in season for me is just trying to keep them healthy, trying to make sure they feel fresh and prepared. Whereas off season is truly where I get to be the head coach of the team. Sometimes I get to have the most say. I don't care if they're as fatigued. I'm really trying to push the needle forward. Whereas in season, obviously, depending on the training age, they can still make some progress, but it's a lot more, all right, you're now a soccer player. You're now a softball player. I want you to be the best at that sport that you can possibly be. So that's where I differentiate the two primarily. Obviously, you have the calendar of where they're at in relation to the actual school year, but those would be the two definitions I give for those.
I think that's a great point where I think sometimes people maybe misunderstand what our goals are, or our objectives and motivations are. And I think you talking about, hey, you're a softball player, you're a soccer player, uh, highlights that we want these athletes to be athletes. And our goal is to make them better versions of themselves and better athletes when they're out there competing. And I would agree where the different seasons is where we can either push or maintain. You know, sports is very competitive, especially I'm sure at your collegiate sector. There's a lot of things on the line. You know, coaches, it's their livelihoods. These players are there on scholarships, and so they have to earn that right. And so wins and losses matter, and stacking those matter. And so, you know, the goal is we want those athletes to be athletes and be competing and be healthy and do all those things. What do you think coaches, since you kind of deal more with coaches, what do you think coaches misunderstand about these phases of a training cycle?
It really depends on the coach. I've worked with, obviously working with multiple different teams. You get all sorts of personalities in sports coaches. Biggest misunderstanding I get is kind of the priorities of where we're at in the season. So like soccer, for example, the culture around soccer is we have these spring games. We need to do the best that we can at these spring games, where in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I need to get these girls prepared because I know I'm not going to see them much over the summer. So I'm going to try and push the needle as much as I can right now. These games in the spring don't matter. We're looking for the championship season in the fall, right? So I've had some conversations back and forth with my sports coaches of trying to realize why we're doing what we're doing in the weight room, and then trying to get some more buy-in from them to show why it's important. Because if I can push that needle, get them just stronger, build the foundation for them in the off season, we're not really like, yes, we want the practice. Yes, it helps condition the team. Yes, it helps build the team chemistry in the spring. But at the same time, if we lose that game, who cares? No one's ever going to look at that record. So trying to push that needle forward just a little bit more to where in the fall when we get back, now I take a step back. I'm still there trying to help make sure they're ready to play for their championship season, trying to win conference.
100%. I think when you're not in the field of strength conditioning, it probably gets lost on people that a lot of the times I guess the field in general, it's still pretty new. You know, sure, you can see there's research and studies or just different ideas that can go back to 1800s and whatnot, but it really wasn't until like the 1950s, maybe even 40s, but really that 60s, 70s period where a lot of the training principles, a lot of the science of training really started to come out. And a lot of times, you know, we're basing a lot of our knowledge off of those time periods. And I think one of the big things that came out of that was these times and these periods where athletes would ramp things up for when they were competing, and then they would pull back and really focus on weaknesses, focuses on where they needed to get better in terms of whatever sport that it was. And I think a lot of times, at least for me in interaction with parents, it seems like parents really put their kids in everything at one time. And I think you brought up a really good point where we can have these periods where the stress, the intensity, and the worth behind us doing something can be a lot less. You know, your point on a spring season practice, you know, game, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. You know, we work with a lot of baseball players here, and you know, to me, I think a parent would probably benefit better from, okay, either put all your eggs in the school team season or the travel team season, and then have the other one be, okay, we're just trying to work on some skills. You know, it doesn't have to be super competitive. We don't need to be practicing every single day. We don't need to be playing in a tournament every weekend or having, you know, 3-4 games during the week. The body has I try to think about it that the body's an organism. We can certainly stress it. We can certainly push it. And that's how we see all this adaptation that we're looking to elicit and have occur. But there has to be some periods of restoration and recovery to where the body can actually catch up and go through those periods of recovery. So I totally agree.
100%. Like you can't stress the body every single day of the entire year. You're just going to get burnout. You're going to get the body to wear down faster than it should. It's where you see, especially in softball and baseball, it's where you see a lot of elbow injuries when they're way too young to be having elbow injuries. And so if we can kind of shift the focus towards, all right, this is more of for fun or for practice, whereas your actual competitive season, like you said, put your eggs in one basket. Which one are you going to prioritize the most? Which one is going to help lead your kid to get that scholarship offer? Trying to push them to be more competitive in that season, I think, is where a lot of parents can learn from us, at least.
100%. I guess for the athletes that, you're interacting with and coaching, certainly high-level athletes have assumingly been playing the game for a long period of time. Do you see a lot of your athletes either being single sport athletes kind of throughout their high school careers in your conversations, or having some nagging injuries, whether that's any joint, really, lower body, upper body? Do you see that, with your teams and at your level?
Yeah, 100%. A lot of the kids that I train here are usually multi-sport athletes, whether it's soccer, basketball, softball, basketball too. A lot of the times they'll at least have played two sports growing up. Some will specialize, like I specialized in just football from high school on. I still had a pretty good career, but a lot of the kids do have those overuse injuries, especially where they just don't emphasize strength training at all. And then it becomes a reoccurring injury. I mean, you've talked about return to play before, but kids will get back too fast from an injury, and then they won't be as mentally prepared for it, or they'll have some sort of weakness, asymmetry somewhere in their body to where they're going to try and re-injure it. So I see that a lot in soccer, where I have one girl who's tore her ACL 3 times. She's on her 6th year, and she's an amazing kid, would do anything in the world for her. But just trying to educate them on the importance of getting into the weight room and trying to make sure that their body has a foundation and is physically prepared before we just throw them back out into that sport.
It is kind of interesting not to, be biased towards football, although I probably do have some bias to it. But I guess when you just think about the sports calendar for either just a football player or anyone, it's seemingly that there's a lot of time in between. You can't really, sure, there's a spring practice or a spring season, but, it ends with one game and it's just practice. And then there's a lot of time off in the winter. There's a lot of time off in the summer. Versus some of these other sports where it's a little bit easier just to play a ton of games. But I guess you talking about that just kind of put that thought in my head, where seemingly, like with football, there's a lot more time in between, a lot more time to recover, for better or worse. I don't know, but
I'm definitely jealous of football schedule. They get their kids a lot more, and they obviously is a physical sport, but they only have 12 games compared to softball had, like, oh my gosh, 30 something. I think they're going to have close to 50 this year.
That's crazy.
Like, God, that would be nice to have about 10 games.
I guess kind of building off that, when you think about, your off-season plans, what are your primary goals? And it could be broader across sports if you want to dive into each sport specifically. But what goals are you looking to accomplish with your teams in an off season?
Again, depends on the team. I know in the spring for soccer, it was get them stronger. They had no strength base whatsoever. And they truly bought into what I was doing. I could not be more proud of them, but we averaged an increase of squat max, 1 rep squat max, estimated about 75 pounds per player.
Awesome.
Again, a lot of that's neurological, just getting them used to actually moving weight. But off-season main goal is just to build the base for whatever output I'm trying to get, whether it's conditioning, whether it's power, whether it's strength. Just build the base to where when I get them back in the fall, I know they have some sort of idea of what we're going to be doing, trying to maintain that from then on. Obviously, I don't get any of my teams over the summer, so I still give them a summer packet. So it's really, if I can get buy-in from them in the spring, that's one of the main pieces too, is teach them why we're doing this, show them how beneficial it can be. We didn't do a whole lot of sprint training just because we had a pretty small team. So they were always practicing, but all of their speed metrics went up. Their change of direction went up. Their acceleration went up. and their max velocity went up, and their jump heights went up as well. And that was almost entirely done with just strength training, just due to the schedule conflicts and when I was able to get them. But I showed them those numbers, and it helped the summer packet as well. So just building buy-in for why we're doing everything is one of my main pieces of that. And then just build the foundation like every strength coach should.
100%. I guess when you think about your priorities with what you're trying to accomplish, you talked about getting your athletes stronger, and then these other qualities seem to increase off of that. I guess, how do you go through your own mental thought process around, hey, these are our goals for our season, and then what's going to be the effects from increasing a certain quality versus another, or focusing on a certain quality versus another?
Yeah. Well, I look at certain qualities, whether it's speed, whether it's power, whether it's strength. I probably am a little biased towards strength, just because that's, I think, what the meat and potatoes of our job is. And then making sure I test every metric to see if it's actually increasing or not. For soccer specifically, obviously, it's a repeat sprint ability. I keep going back to soccer, but we're about to start our season. That's where my mind is at right now. So knowing that they need to be able to be as powerful as possible over and over and over again. So that's the quality that I'm really looking at for them. And then if I can, whatever I see their weakest link is or the lowest hanging fruit, I'm going to try and pick that first to where I can push that adaptation as far as I can. And it's seemed to do really well so far. Again, we talked about it earlier, but the best player is an available player. Like, I don't care how high you can jump if you're never on the field. I don't care how much you can squat if you're never on the field. So making sure that they are the best soccer player and the most available soccer player that they can be.
No, I think it's an awesome point. From my side and my perspective in the private sector, a lot of times parents come to us with, hey, I want our kid to be faster. And there's this kind of main focus on speed right now at the moment. And I would agree where in working with these athletes, there seems to be a lack of strength amongst them. And that could be just their own body weight. That could be when we actually start to load these athletes up. I don't know, the exact cause of why that might be the case, but I've certainly found it to be true as well, where when we get our athletes a lot stronger, both lower body, upper body, bilateral, unilateral, every other quality increases. And I think the one thing that's lost is that we're trying to take a long-term approach with all these athletes. And I would even argue that even in the college sector, like, they are still developing. And so there's kind of this progression in terms of what development looks like. You need to start with a base and kind of slowly kind of start to add and build off the top of that. And, I think the research points to this. I've certainly seen it from my own experience, but strength is that core foundation. And once you get a really strong base, and there's a host of metrics that, you could define as what is strong or strong enough. But once you kind of get there, these other qualities then, seem to increase at much greater rates. So I certainly would agree with that perspective. The one thing that I find interesting, just in the difference in your setting versus my setting, is just these periods of in season and off season. For me, it seems like these kids are always in season in some way, in some capacity. And that could just be from changing sports. So going from a basketball season right into a baseball season. A lot of times we have a lot of kids that go from baseball season and now we're right into football season, or then transition again into a fall baseball season. So like for us, a lot of these times these kids don't have too much of an off season. Maybe it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but it's very small. And so I think, for us and what we're trying to do, we want to increase all these qualities, and we certainly try to do that. There's different models of periodization that different people follow. I think we tried the more concurrent approach where we want to hit all these qualities just because we don't have that time to really focus on one, saturate one before we then move on to the next. And so I think from our side, progress tends to be maybe a little bit slower just because, we can't put all our focus in one thing, we kind of need to spread out our priorities, the adaptations we're looking to occur. And then just over time, as these athletes stay consistent, we can see these much greater increases in gains.
Absolutely. I think that's a major point. Is I love concurrent training. I think traditional periodization, where you're only focused on one quality at a time, detrains other qualities a lot, is what I see out of it. And when you're always on the go, whether most of our kids, especially in the non-football or the Olympic side of it instead of football setting, they're pretty undertrained. Their training age is pretty low. So whereas if you just kind of touch that quality, they're going to see increases in it. So I might emphasize different qualities throughout the year. So like obviously off season, I talked a lot about strength, but now as we're transitioning into in season, it's still touching strength. It's still touching hypertrophy with some of my accessory work. Like I'm not going to do strength for lateral raises, but trying to still make sure the shoulder is mobile and stuff like that. I'll still hit some of those hypertrophy ranges with some of my accessory work, but then it's transitioning more into power work. So making sure our jump volume is a little bit higher to where they can actually manage it, but trying to drive that intent first. That is my emphasis of it, but I'll jump year round. Like there's never a point in the year where I'm not having them throw a med ball, not having them jump to max intent. It's just depending. I'll just kind of slide the volume or intensity based on what time of the year it's in.
Yeah, and I think this is probably a good kind of segue. What does power mean to you, or how do you see power being expressed, with your athletes, whether that's softball, whether that's soccer, but what does that power quality mean to you?
I'll go softball this time, since I've talked a lot about soccer, but power for me is the body being able to express like 0 to 60 almost rate of force development, trying to, for softball specifically, hitting home runs. Do they have the power to actually get that ball over the fence or hit it into the hole where they need to? Do they have the ability to go 0 to 60 trying to steal a base? Do they actually have the power output to get to that next base before the pitcher turns around and gets them out or the catcher gets their pop time up? And so training that, last year we had maybe 5 home runs in the entire first half of the season. And then all of a sudden, as I continued to, and I'm not going to take all the credit for that. I know I'm a coach, but we did focus a lot more on jumps and especially horizontal force production. And all of a sudden we got to the tournament. We were girls that you would have never thought would hit home runs or were gap players or slap hitters were hitting home runs or getting pretty dang near. And so that transitioned to a lot more bar speed, a lot more explosive jumps, a lot more med ball throws, I think helped that quality a little bit more. Obviously, they're practicing as well, but still trying to get their nervous system to be firing a little bit faster.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you bring up there where, to me, it's power is the expression of everything. It's like when an athlete is in their game, in their scenario, in their situation, they're going to be relying on power to execute the task that they're going to be doing it, or whatever the task might be, and it comes down to just really like the time to get to whatever it might be. Like how fast can a softball player get that bat around, to go and hit the ball, or how fast can they throw the ball from the outfield to home and try to get someone out at home, whatever it might be. And so I think with that, it's like how I've seen it too is athletes that don't have that strength foundation yet is like they can't necessarily be powerful or as powerful as they might be. And I think a lot of times with youth athletes, they kind of get into these compensatory positions or movement patterns where they can kind of make up for that lack of power. But I think that's where you see, poor running mechanics, or like a poor swing where, maybe they're not twisting their hips to get that bat around and they're just relying on the upper body. So yeah, I think power training is certainly beneficial and must be included in any sort of program. So yeah, I think you bring up a good point there with that. What would you say like the biggest mistake that maybe high school athletes or athletes that you work with now at LMU, what mistakes do they make once the season starts
Still training like a bodybuilder. So I worked with men's lacrosse as well last year. And one of the biggest things I saw for them is like, hey, coach, do you care if I come and do a lift real fast? I'm like, you know what, sure. I love doing the extra work. And all of a sudden I see a push-pull leg split of just 4x10 on chest flies, 4x10 incline bench. And it's just that, again, and I was there once too. When I was a freshman in college going into it, I thought I was doing everything right. But like we were just talking about, I think power is how we actually transfer the weight room to the field. And if all you ever do is try and get bigger and get stronger, you can have a 600-pound squat, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to run fast. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to make the cuts that you need to in the game. And so I think the biggest mistake is not emphasizing the qualities that you need to. And that's why I think we're so important for our athletes, is giving them a plan that actually helps them play better at their sport. Like if you want to go be a bodybuilder, by all means, push, pull legs, bro split, high reps, high volume, but trying to protect their joints, like that's just a lot of stress on top of an already intense season. I think is the biggest mistake I've seen.
I think I like that point where these athletes already have a lot that they're going through and having to think about and process, both from, social lives, school lives, and then with their sport, having to think about, okay, what should I be doing from a training perspective, at what time, and kind of all these other factors. I definitely think that's really important, to where a coach can come in and be like, hey, because of X, Y, and Z reason, this is what we're going to do. Because of our training, because of our knowledge, this is what we should be focusing on. And to your point, I think power is that big thing that athletes should be focusing on in season and maintaining, and just giving them one less thing to think about. I've certainly seen it with our athletes where I think they're under a lot of pressure, and that could be from themselves, it could be from peers, and it could just be from family pressure. And so just kind of giving them one less thing to worry about. Hey, here's a workout. It's going to make you a better athlete. Let's go through it. Let's give it everything we got. And then boom, you're on to the next thing. Do you think there's anything or I guess if you were to have a conversation with a coach where they don't want to train in season, and it's like, hey, we just want to practice 4 times a week, have our 2 games, I guess what sort of things are you going to be talking about with them to try and change their mind, and maybe get 30 minutes, 60 minutes with them? Obviously more would be great from our perspectives, but I guess what sort of things would you be telling them to try and get more time with those teams?
I think it goes back to trying to mitigate the risk of injury. Obviously, athletes are always in a compromised position playing their sport. It's just the chaos of playing a sport. You're putting your body at risk to maybe something is going to happen. But if we continue to maintain the strength that we have, if we continue to expose the tissues in the body to some extra stressors, you'll be able to recover from a lot of stuff easier. You'll be able to maintain the outputs that you're looking for. Because we both know once you don't hit a quality, it starts to detrain, especially that speed quality. If you don't train at all in the season, your strength is going to go down by the time you're hitting the most important time of the year, the playoffs, or if you're trying to make that conference championship run. So if we can continue to have them strength train, get through a full range of motion and whatever in a weighted sense, those tissues, tendons, ligaments should be able to stay adapted to the stress that we're trying to put on their body, to where it's not just we're going to run them into the dirt by the time they get to the conference play, especially. So that's the conversation I usually try and have of why it's important. That's also why I'm very glad to have a great athletic training staff, because me and them can go in conjunction and show why, whether it's through studies or just a personal conversation of like, hey, you've trusted me this far. I know I'm biased of why I think the weight room is important. That's my job. But at the same time, we're here to supplement your athletes and do the best for your athletes. We wouldn't have a job in the first place if it wasn't important. And so if I can continue to educate them just a little bit, obviously they're the head coach. Whatever they say goes. If I lose that battle, then I'm still going to be there for athletes as much as I can. But just showing why strength and power and all this other training that we're doing helps decrease the risk of injury.
And I think that point kind of gets lost, or maybe there's just a lack of understanding where when we go through a sport, it's always and most of the time going to be a similar movement pattern. You think about throwing, the shoulder's going to be going through the same motion consistently over time. And, if you were to do the same thing on, say, like a bench press, and you go and bench press every single day, sure, maybe you're varying how heavy you're going or the speed of the bar. But at some point, you're probably not going to be able to do what you once did, and you might get hurt in the process. But all these sports have those same movement patterns. And I think that's one of the great things about a strength program or just strength training in general, is because we can offset those movement patterns. The body has an awesome way of supporting itself and going through motion, and it relies on primary muscles, it relies on secondary muscles. We can get into agonist, antagonist, pairings. But the more that we can focus on those joints and movement patterns and muscles that, aren't getting the same sort of attention to offset all that stress that these repeated motions have on the body, I think that's a really good area of improvement that a lot of these athletes could have, and just help with maintaining everything that they have, maintaining their health, maintaining any quality, whether that's strength, power, speed, just because they're consistently in those movement patterns over the course of a season.
Yeah. I think another huge point is if you don't train at all in the in-season, your off-season, you're just playing catch-up again. And that first week they're back in the off-season, they're going to be sore as crap because they haven't done anything for months. And so it's making sure that we can actually drive adaptation and trying to make them a better athlete in the off-season. Because if you don't do anything and all you did is play your sport, then all of a sudden we're not able to get you to a place that is a better place than you were last year. Your metrics will they're going to dip back down, and then we're just going to play catch up to get back up the baseline. And then it's just going to be a vicious cycle of, all right, now we're trying to play catch up each year. Now we're never actually getting better as an athlete. Now, obviously for your case, working with younger athletes, just getting older is going to help them produce higher outputs. But in my case specifically, where my kids are pretty tapped out genetically, now it's trying to just get them a little bit better physically to where their body is getting to the most genetically potential it can get.
I think that's a hard conversation to have as a coach. All the athletes that I've interacted with, I'm sure it's probably the same for you. They want to see these numbers go up. They're all competitive, whether that's with themselves or, amongst the team. So like they want to be lifting more, they want to be sprinting faster, and then they're not. And, a lot of times I've seen it where they take it pretty personal on themselves and, oh, I'm not strong, or I'm not fast, or I'm not a good athlete, whatever the term they might use. But it's a hard conversation because, it's trying to redirect to, okay, it's not you specifically, it's the consistency, it's the training process, it's the training plan, and how we've executed it thus far. But I found those conversations to be difficult, where these kids kind of get in their own heads about, what it might mean for them. And I'm guessing you've probably had similar ones in your experience too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess maybe just to kind of close some stuff out here, just going through some rapid fire questions, just kind of whatever comes to mind, we can just kind of both give an answer and we'll kind of wrap this thing up. But do you think athletes should max out during the season?
No. That's what velocity-based training is for, kind of get an estimate. That's what jumping is for, counter movement jumps on force plates. I'm very lucky to have a set of force plates. But you can test qualities and see where they're at physically in other ways. You do not have to do that.
I would agree. I would say we don't have to find a true 1 rep max, but I would definitely be in favor of pushing, 90% of a 1 rep max, really trying to push those higher intensities, decreasing volume. But yeah, we don't have to be going out and finding any new 1 rep maxes on anything.
No.
What would your preference be for in-season training? Lifting 2 days a week or 3 days a week?
Again, depends on the sport, actually. If it's soccer where they're playing on a Wednesday and a Saturday, probably just 2 days a week. If it's softball, I had them 3 days a week and it worked pretty well. I think probably just going to 2 days again for them because they usually have a Wednesday and then it's a Saturday. But if it's sport like lacrosse or football, definitely 3 days. You just have more time in between to recover and you can hit some other qualities that you might not get to in 2 sessions.
No, I like that. I would kind of take the opposite approach. I would probably say 2, just based on, my demographic. Sometimes these kids are in multiple sports in one season. And so it's not trying to overdo it from a stress perspective. Excuse me. So I kind of think the less is more approach here probably would be more beneficial, at least for my kids. Sprinting during the season, do you like it? Do you try to stay away from it? What are your thoughts on sprinting in season?
I love it. I'm also very blessed to have GPS. So for my developmental players, I think it's really important to make sure we touch that quality because speed detrains the fastest compared to strength gains. If it's a high minute player, probably not as much just to protect their hamstrings.
I like it. I'm for it as well. I think kids and athletes should always be sprinting, and it doesn't have to be 10 reps, of 10, 15 yards, 20 yards, but at least, 1, 2, 3 reps, I think would be beneficial for them. What do you think the best, or maybe let's go with this one. What do you think is the most underrated habit for athletes?
Underrated, eating. Eating 100%. The amount of conversations I've had, especially with male and female athletes, is just make sure you're getting the proper nutrition and making sure you're sleeping enough. Recovery is obviously where you actually get the adaptations, and making sure that we are staying as prepared and as fresh as possible.
I agree. I have eating conversations with our kids all the time, and it kind of shocks me how little they actually do eat.
Yeah.
And I know for me, when I was kind of in their shoes and their age, man, I was eating all the time,
You had to force me to stop eating, honestly.
Yes. My parents would always say the kitchen's closed. You can't eat anymore. All right, maybe last one. What do you think the most overrated recovery method is for athletes?
Obviously a lot of it's feel good, some of it's placebo, but like dry needling, cupping, things of those natures, I think those are a good supplement to a good recovery routine. So if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not eating enough, like we just said, those extra tools are just band-aids on a bullet hole. They're not going to be the make all be all of what your recovery actually is. So if you have access to those and they make you feel good, 100% use them. I use them sometimes, but they're not going to save you from a season of under recovery.
100%. Yeah, I think all those things, they're nice to have, but if you're majoring in the minors with those and really focusing on getting some Normatec boots on, hopping in a nice bath, going into like a warm hot tub kind of thing, but you're sleeping 5 hours a night, 6 hours a night, nothing's really going to change. And certainly if you're not eating well or eating enough, you're just not going to feel all that good, no matter how loose or, whatever your muscles might feel. So I would certainly agree with that. All right. I think we'll put a pin in this one. Coach, I appreciate your time and your thoughts. And we'll call this good.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.